So the three festivals, the main festivals, are certainly historical, and they relate to us today because the exodus from Egypt is paradigmatic of our exodus from all of the restraints of the material world that hold Israel back from our divine mission of being the nation of Kohanim, Am Segula, the treasured nation that are servants and ministers to the All-High, the Supreme. Now, Chanukah and Purim, which are certainly two very historical festivals, are nevertheless, because they're so miraculous in some ways, we also have they have a very great part in our hearts. The particular observances of the menorah on Chanukah and the Megillah and the feasting and the drunkenness of Purim have a tremendous hold over all Israel. But again, those events, the events of the Megillah, of Shushan Habirah, in the time of Mordechai and Esther, are a kind of incredible story, but we need to think hard to connect it with ourselves. Likewise, Chanukah, an amazing miracle and indeed very relevant in terms of the cultural struggle that is going on in our time between people of faith and people who are against all of the values of traditional faith. So this is indeed a festival that should have relevance to us, but in many ways Tisha B'Av has been a time for reflecting on the history of Israel, the history of Jews. In the present age, many people associate the mourning of Tisha B'Av with our mourning over the innumerable victims of terror, of hatred, of genocide efforts that have taken place in the Holocaust period and from the time of the establishment of the State of Israel until literally these very days. We are seeing day by day outrages, and we have enemies all around us who are preparing the most horrendous military tactics they would like to, God forbid, use against us. So if we follow the observances of Tisha B'Av, they start on the eve of Tisha B'Av, after the evening service, where the first thing we do is to read Eicha, the scroll of Lamentations, which is attributed to the prophet Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. And indeed, Lamentations is history most graphically presented. We see pictures of the suffering of the innocent children starving in the streets, craving for some mother's milk or for some porridge from cereal to keep them going during the horrendous sieges, and then the bloodshed also graphically portrayed in Eicha, which as a work of prophecy of Jeremiah is laden with historical allusions and prophecy, and also a great amount of comfort, because Tisha B'Av is about comfort. It is deriving comfort by visiting the past in a very honest and naked way. We repeat the reading of Eicha in the synagogue in the morning of Tisha B'Av, and all the various communities besides Eicha, which is known to in rabbinical literature as kinot, the dirges, the lamentations. We have many creations of outstanding meshovarim, poets of the people of Israel. Rabbi Elazar Hakalir, who has many of the kinot that are included in the rites. There are later kinot also, kinot dating from the Middle Ages, commemorating the terrible pogroms and murders that were perpetrated in places like in German cities of Speyer and Magenza and other places with likewise among the communities of England, there are some kinot that were written in mourning for the victims of the York massacres and other massacres in the Middle Ages. And in this sense, the Jewish people is compelled to come to terms with the fact that we have a world with many, many enemies around us. And we have the particular lesson which is set down by Echo, that whatever the evil perpetrated by the nations, by the Babylonians, Bat Bavel, or by the Edomites, that though we will see, as prophesied, the vengeance against them, the point is that we are not craving or wanting to see vengeance. The essential message of Tisha B'Av is that when we look around at the history and the disasters, that we are looking in ourselves and saying, what must I correct in order to take us higher, our people higher? Rabbi Nachman teaches this in a very special portion, a section of his teaching in Likutei Moharan, part 2, Torah Samach Zayin 67, where he is explaining that the whole destruction of the temple is not just the destruction of a physical building, but the temple is a bayit, a house. And the house is alluded to in the opening word of the Hebrew text of the Torah, Bereshis. Bereshis, 6 letters, Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Taf, 3 of which are the word bayit, and the other 3 are the word Rosh. The temple must have a high priest, just a physical building without anything going on there. There must be a minister who is elevating the entire world, the world of mineral, the world of the inanimate, the world of vegetable, the world of the animal, and the world of the human, all in service to the one unified, infinite God. There must be a minister in the temple, and that is the tzaddik. And the true destruction, teaches Rabbi Nachman there, Torah Samach Zayin 67, part 2 of Likutei Moharan, is actually the concealment of the radiance of the tzaddik from the world. Do we know of such a tzaddik? I would think only of Rabbi Nachman, of Arizal, of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, of Moshe Rabbeinu himself. In our time, of the Rebbe of Lubavitch, of the Baba Sali, other outstanding tzaddikim, that it is their demise and their eclipse from the world, which is the real churban, the real destruction, because we have no leader. And that's our essential crisis in this actual time. Here we are faced by an enormous amount over which to mourn. If we're to believe the many people who are not going along with all those who deny conspiracy theories, if we are willing to take our minds out of the box, to think outside the box of the so-called legacy media, and we're prepared to take a wider perspective, which is available today very widely, from doctors, from professors, from scientists, from many others who do not go along with what is now being parroted as the so-called mainstream consensus. There are people who do not go along with this in any way. And if we are to entertain the possibility that what they are saying is actually has some validity, then to have an organization of extremely wealthy and powerful businessmen that are setting themselves up to, as a forum, to dictate the world's economic future and to steer the world in all kinds of ways that are intended to completely, in their own words, reset the world economy and world societies and world government. And when we are faced with an organization that avowedly, as can be seen on their website, state that the traditional role of parents in the upbringing of children must be replaced by the role of educators under the supervision of the state, which means that this future agenda is against freedom of faith and freedom to bring up children, educate children in accordance with one's beliefs. So this is one threat. We are all threatened by the very imminent replacement of traditional money and currency, which itself is pretty worthless anyway, because all you have is bits of paper in your hand, and now the bits of paper are intended to be changed into bits on a computer memory, and all the bits will be under the supervision of your central bank and your government. Well, if you don't mind that level of possible surveillance into your life and your expenditure, then don't be worried. But if you don't like the idea that everything you do economically, from purchasing your groceries or buying gas for your car, is going to be all recorded, if you don't really like that idea, then that might be something also to mourn about, as we're all still hardly recovering from the effects of the COVID pandemic. Now we're being warned by WHO of coming pandemics. And we already know that once bitten, twice shy, we do not know what lies ahead. More things you want to warn about? Well, just look at what's happening in Ukraine. Let's look at the now export of new kinds of cluster bombs, which hitherto have not really been used that much in the conflict. They're now being spread there, and that does not augur well, nor does the talk about use of nuclear weapons augur well, nor the shift of alliances in the European countries joining NATO and many other, all the noise over Taiwan, between Taiwan and China. There's a huge shift going on in the world around us. And it's very, very relevant to Tisha B'Av. I plan, God willing, to speak more about the secrets of the future temple, about the teachings of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, about the absolute centrality of the temple for peace, stability, and blessing in the entire world. For that's what everyone is talking about. The whole concept of the dangers of climate change is all actually some kind of cry for help about the very strange ecological behavior. And if only the people realize that what you have to have is on our Temple Mount, the structure that is not for the Muslims and not for the Jews, not for the Christians, and not for anybody except for the service of the one God that creates us all. When that will be added, then the blessing will follow. And it's absolutely central to what we are talking about on Tisha B'Av, that what is spreading now throughout the world is the concept of a secular world government. It would have to be secular, just like the United Nations is secular, because people would not agree that it should be either Islamic world government or Christian world government, and certainly not a Jewish world government. But the temple is the place where not only does the altar stand at the very center of the temple courtyard, because the altar is the focus of service. The altar is the elevation to the one God that spoke and the world came into being. But side by side to the temple courtyard was the Lishkat Agazit, the chamber of the hewn stones, where the Sanhedrin would be in session, and from there would come Torah to the entire world. Now, there are all kinds of people who are expressing non-Jewish people and Jewish people who are expressing terror of the spread of the feared religious coercion of Torah. And what are they really so afraid about? What are they so afraid about? There are anti-Semites who are crying against the concept of the 7 Noahide commandments. What is so terrible to demand an end to the rampages of murder, of killing and of violence that are going on across countries across the world? And authorities do absolutely nothing about it. Neither governments nor police are willing to take on. Governments of a country like Mexico have not been willing to take on the drug cartels. Well, that's not justice. That goes contrary to the 7 Noahide laws. What is so terrible about that? The law against stealing, against theft of robbery of the 7 Noahide laws includes the stealing, the theft and the trafficking of little children, which is in many people's minds among the top of the agenda of the Western world, that they are not only the Western world, but of all the world, that nothing is done to stop this. So what is so terrible about spreading the Noahide laws to the nations? The Jews are not asking the nations to become subject to the Jews. The Jews are requesting the nations to bring about true law, divine law, the law that thou shalt not kill, that thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, that you shall set up courts of law, and the other universal commandments of mankind. That's all. Nobody's saying you mustn't watch movies, nobody's saying you mustn't entertain, you mustn't do sports, you must rest on the Sabbath. Nobody's saying that at all. So what's so bad about that? We see today in the world a lawless world, and we see at the very top levels of countries degrees of corruption which, if their full extent were known, would be absolutely horrendous to people. Little bits and pieces are coming to light, particularly to people who are willing to look beyond the mainstream media at what is being spread very widely on other platforms. And the details are really not at all unexpected, but nevertheless shocking when one considers the degree of crime and indeed little treason on the part of people who are willing to sell their country's interests to other nations. Here in Israel right now, there is a national struggle between the majority of the country who expressed their will very clearly in the last general election by giving a majority to the current government coalition, as against a very vociferous minority who have been given a loudspeaker and are being lavishly financed by people who want to upset and destroy the current culture in the land of Israel and to undermine Judaism in Israel. These are not new efforts. For generations, people have been fighting against the observance of the Sabbath in Israel, where in cities since the War of Independence and the establishment of the state, there were no public transport on the Sabbath. Nobody shot at cars that chose to ride on the Sabbath on the highways or in cities, but there was no public transport out of respect for the Sabbath day. And systematically, this has been eroded in the time since I have been in Israel for the last 43 years. Likewise, places of entertainment, restaurants, shops were not open in Jerusalem on the Shabbat until secularists took control of the city and changed the municipality laws back in 1987. and allowed places of entertainment, allows cafes, and now anything goes, shops and cars. And exactly at the time when those municipal laws were changed to allow desecration of the Sabbath according to the law, exactly then started what was called the First Intifada in the fall of 1987, the first throwing of stones by Arabs at cars of Jews, followed by the knifings, and followed by the far more intense Second Intifada of 2000, and the rest is history. And all of this is bound up with the holiness of Jerusalem, and this is the Khurban, the absence of the temple and the absence of any leader that has succeeded in winning the hearts of all the people through the wisdom of the leader. We do not yet see such a leader. We are seeing now, almost 30 years since the passing of the Rebbe of Lubavitch, that people across the Jewish world have come to understand the greatness of what he achieved and are continuing to seek to promote and to encourage the organizations that he first established. But there's certainly no single spiritual leader who speaks beyond all parochial interests. And that's part of the whole problem of the world judicial system, which is that the judiciaries are populated by people who are in it for the money and are in it for their opinions, because they are people of influence who are chosen by political parties or by other interests. In the United States, it's well known that the judges of the High Court are appointed by the president, subject to the approval of the Congress. And so when you have a right-wing president and a right-wing Congress, you have right-wing judges on the panel. When you have a left-wing president and left-wing Congress, you have left-wing judges on the Supreme Court. And that's how it works in America and a number of other countries. Here in Israel, the way that it works is that a clique of high court judges from the array of up-and-coming lawyers and judges in the Israeli legal profession, they decide who is going to join them, who they're going to elevate, and who they're going to bring up finally to the bench of the Israel Supreme Court. Well, when I say that the judges are in it for the money and the glory, the state of Israel was founded in the minds of all Jewish people as a Jewish state. And even though over the years the Jewish character of the state has been systematically attacked and eroded, and none other than by the Israeli Supreme Court, by this band of self-selecting judges. So these judges of Israel, far from wanting to have any kind of law system that is based on the Torah and based upon the divine right of the children of Israel to the Holy Land, they are seeking the esteem of the judges of Europe and the judges of the International Court of Strasbourg. In other words, the judges of the High Court of Israel, who are a self-selecting body, have entirely given themselves over to the esteem and the honor which they receive from the judiciaries of Europe and elsewhere, which are predominantly today liberal left-wing. So the judges of the High Court, having spent their time in Europe and having received the praise of their fellow judges, come back to Israel and show the utmost leniency to Arab terrorists and the utmost stringency to Jews who want to live in our promised land. Issues before the High Court were over a few dunams of land, a few acres of land, which are part of the traditional heartland of the Jewish nation in Yehuda and Shomron, Judea and Samaria. The battles before the High Court, which eventually the so-called settlement has to be disbanded, and the Israeli army is sent in to destroy houses belonging to built with the sweat and tears and blood of people, with women and little children, and all under fire from surrounding terrorists. And invariably the Bagatz, the Supreme Court of Israel, so-called Bet Gavoa Mishpat B'Tzedek, the High Court of Righteousness, invariably rule against the so-called the demonized mitnahalim, those brave warriors who want to assert our presence in the heartlands of the Promised Land. And at the same time, there are countless illegal buildings springing up in areas where the so-called Oslo Accords prohibited them being built by Arabs. Enormous cities which spring up in days, and not a word is said about them. The government is too frightened to do anything because Washington is breathing down their neck, and in any case the High Court is there to make sure that nothing will change, because they have an interest in Israel's not being a Jewish country, but at best some kind of multi-ethnic country where in the eyes of the law all are equal except those to whom the law chooses to give preference. The judiciary is corrupt, and that is why there are demonstrations in Israel by hundreds of thousands in favor of the new legislation which the government has introduced to change the ability of the Supreme Court of Israel to strike down decisions of the Israeli elected Knesset on the grounds that the judges don't find them reasonable. All they want to do is to limit the ability of the judges to, at will, strike down anything which the democratically elected Knesset has voted for because of their particular European sensitivities. Now, the demonstrations against, which are violent, which are aggressive, which are not only against government legislation, but against Judaism, like the non-kosher restaurant in Tel Aviv that has opened its doors today on Tisha B'Av to make available pork and ham dishes in protest against the threat of religious coercion and tyranny in Israel. These people have a very loud megaphone of enormous publicity. The television, the national channel, Channel 12, is totally in favor of the protests and against the democratically elected government's legislation. The same is true of the corporate-owned media, the main newspapers. And here we actually have a battle going on, just like in the United States right now. There is a national battle going on for the soul of the country. In the USA, it's not just about former President Donald Trump or the present President Joe Biden. And here in Israel, it's not just between the Zionist, national religious, observant, as against leftists, liberals, people who want to spread the ability for gender changes and marriages between men and men, women and women, and many other things. It's a battle between two different viewpoints. So I entitled today's presentation, History and Prophecy. We are living the history still. We are in our time witnessing the continuing destruction of the temple, because, as our sages said, any generation in which the temple is not rebuilt is a temple in which it's as if that generation had destroyed it. Well, there's not much I could do if the whole generation is not building it, and we would like to build it. We are pretty powerless. Nevertheless, our sages taught that a person who acquires the wisdom of Torah, da'at, it's as if the temple is built in his time or her time. When we acquire true Torah wisdom, we see that it can all fit together, and that's where we turn from history to prophecy. Our prophets appear mostly to have been addressing their own generations. I would say particularly Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Isaiah is known to be speaking to all of the generations, as to be offering us the greatest consolations. Well, in our Know Your Bible study cycle this year, we've recently completed Jeremiah and embarked on Ezekiel. And I think it's noteworthy that in the case of Jeremiah, clearly we see that what he was talking about for years in his prophecies before the actual destruction, because Jeremiah started prophesying in the time of King Josiah, and prophesied through the worst days of the last years of the first temple, through its destruction and into the final destruction of Jewish sovereignty in Judea. He actually foresaw everything which happened, and when we then see how it did all happen as he foresaw it, that the king was captured, that he was taken to Babylon, but he did not see that Babylon because he had already been blinded, and so many other things that came true from the fact that Jeremiah prophecies came true. We may infer that what he spoke through the Spirit of God will come true also where he prophesies to our time, as in these most beautiful prophecies in chapter 2 of Jeremiah, chapter 31, particularly his messianic prophecies. And likewise, Ezekiel began his prophecy in Babylon after the exile of King Jeconiah, the first exile from Judah, the exile in which Mordechai and Esther and Daniel and his companions were taken to Babylon. And Ezekiel was one of the first in Babylon. We can see this from the dating in his prophecies, and he was all the time prophesying about the coming destruction of Jerusalem and of the temple because of the sins of the people, the idolatry and the corruption. And then it all came true and it happened, and therefore, since it did happen as he prophesied, we will now infer, and this is the comfort we have today on Tisha B'Av, that all of the prophecies that are contained in the consolation sections of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and particularly and first and foremost of Isaiah, will all come true. And the temple will indeed be restored on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. And the nations will indeed flock to Jerusalem to hear the Torah, the true Torah that comes out of Zion. Because it will not be a place where people come to make money or make money out of it. It will be a place where people come to serve the one God. People want to truly repent. People want to understand the lessons of the services of the Torah, the service of the temple, to internalize the lessons of subjection to the will of God. And in the case of the life of each and every one of us, our submission to the study of the Torah and the the practice of the Torah. Indeed, our sages open their midrash on Eicha, Lamentations, by saying that it is essentially two things that keep the temple alive, and these are the things that Rabbi Nachman is teaching about. These two things are prayer and particularly the study of Torah. Where there is the study of Torah that will bring you to prayer. When I say the study of Torah, I do not mean you must study Talmud. I mean, first of all, study the 5 books of Moses and the Tanakh and understand the worldview of the Torah as summed up, for example, in that remarkable work, The Way of God, Derech Hashem of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. Understand what this creation is about. Learn about the ways of prayer, the ways of prayer from the heart, and what prayer really is, and how we work on ourselves and elevate ourselves through this. And so Torah brings to prayer and connection with God, and this is how we essentially attain this da'at, this understanding. Da'at is not some abstract thing. Da'at is something that penetrates down into the world. It's something that, yes, begins in our minds, but it comes and is felt in our hearts and in all of ourselves, and intuitively, and our eyes become opened. And it's not just through the building of the temple that the eyes of the world become open, but through the presence and the revelation of the tzaddik in the world, who teaches the ways of Torah. For some people, the tzaddik is here and alive. Those many, many devoted Hasidim of the Rebbe of Lubavitch until today are going in his ways, are nourished by his teachings, and many, many people outside, specifically the ranks of Chabad, are nourished by the Lubavitcher Rebbe's videos available on many platforms, little segments of most beautiful and highly relevant teachings. For many others, the true leader is perhaps the missing piece. At the time of the Lubavitcher, there was none like him to explain and comment on current events and to give guidance to us as to what to do. I remember personally the time of the Gulf War, back in the run-up to the Gulf War, from 1990, the day after Tisha B'Av, 1990, when Saddam Hussein went into Iraq, and the next thing we're all being told that we're going to be have chemical and biological attacks against us, and we all had to go around with gas masks. Well, we survived all of that, and we survived. Israel has survived the Holocaust, has survived countless persecutions throughout the ages, and here Israel are back in the promised land, up and down the land, and no intention of going anywhere. Absolutely no intention of going anywhere, because this is the land of Israel, the land of the people of Israel. And Tisha B'Av is a day to associate with Israel in the hardest times. Really, in the hardest times when it's like Maimonides says in the code, in the laws of the fasts, speaking of Tisha B'Av, that the truly pious on Tisha B'Av would sit there like their dead relative lying in front of them before burial. They were so completely shocked by the reality. And so we should be, if you just go through the list of things I went through before. The war in Ukraine that could become a nuclear war, the world recession, and a new pandemic, God forbid, and all of the other stuff. It's all actually happening. We need Moshiach now, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe would say. We have no hope except our hope in the temple, and we can internalize the temple by turning our minds into a temple where we throw out all of the chametz, all of that is polluted in contemporary culture. We cast it out. and we prime our minds with Torah and Tefillah. For a person that does not know the Hebrew, you have your choice of the prayers of the Siddur, you have the prayers from the heart. The traditional order of service of the Siddur, 7 days a week, is actually a recreation in our house of prayer, in our home, in the place where we pray, a recreation of the temple. And we are building the temple by becoming temple aware. And we prime ourselves 3 times a day with Shmona Esrei, with the Amidah prayer, 7 days a week. We are constantly becoming focused on the temple. Ritzei, the first of the 3 concluding blessings, where we appeal to God to accept our prayers, like the fire offerings on the altar. We are priming ourselves with temple consciousness, because the real altar is the altar of the prayers that we bring out from our hearts. Sometimes it takes great gevorah to express our prayers. We have to push ourselves, force ourselves to get it out. You don't have to say everything and verbalize everything, but do breathe out your prayers. When your prayers are vibrating in the air, that affects the whole cosmos. Yes, the cry from the heart, and sometimes we can't put it into words. But prayer, faith, and Torah, these are the building blocks of the temple, and never more so than when we are able to join with another, to bring one more in. There's somewhere there that you can connect with and give them a share of what you have. And each one that we can bring in is one more brick, one more precious stone that's been rescued from the garbage heap out in the streets, as it states in Echa. One more precious stone that is part of the universal house of prayer that is being built through our teshuvah in our process of restoration. We are on the way with every good thought, with every good intention now at this moment of Ratzon, on the afternoon of Tisha B'Av. From now on, it's all upwards. From Tisha B'Av, day by day, we come closer to Tu B'Av, 15th of Av, which is one of the holiest days of the Torah calendar, equaled only by Yom Kippur. And already Tu B'Av is the gateway to the high holidays, to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It takes 40 days from conception for the little egg to develop to a real fetus of 40 days. And likewise from 15th of Av until 25th of Elul is 40 days, and 25th of Elul is the first day of the 6 days of creation with Rosh Hashanah as its summit. And then Yom Kippur, it's all upwards. And this all begins with Tisha B'Av, with that birth of Mashiach that is in each one of us. And we connect most with Mashiach through our holy teacher, through Rabbeinu, through our chain of Tzaddikei Emet, the true Tzaddikim. And at the heart of all is Moshe Rabbeinu, who is with us and in us. Reb Nachman teaches that the soul of Moshe is deep, deep, deep within each one of us. And that's an amazing thing, that we have the Raya Mahemana, the faithful shepherd, with us, who prepared us through his teachings, who will take us through the coming weeks in the unfolding portions of the book of Deuteronomy, with their incredible blessings and comfort and beautiful code. So my friends, Tisha B'Av, we are in the custom of not giving explicit shalom. We have the custom to wish that each and every one of us will see with our flesh the Biad Melech HaMashiach, coming of King Mashiach, together with Kibbutz Galuyot, the gathering of all of our exiled, and together with the rebuilding of our holy temple, Imhera B'Yameinu, Amen.